Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 6 quick yes or no questions. Will you commit to no interference with the scope of the special counsel's investigation?
I will. The scope of the special counsel's investigation is set by his charter and by the regulations, and I will ensure that those are maintained.
Will you commit to providing Mr. Mueller with the resources, funds, and time needed to complete his investigation?
Yes.
Will you commit to ensuring that Special Counsel Mueller is not terminated without good cause, consistent with department regulations?
Absolutely.
If Special Counsel Mueller makes any request, for instance, about the scope of his investigation or resources for his investigation, will you commit to notifying Congress if you deny that request?
I think the regulations require notification of Congress if there's a disagreement.
Thank you. And I have 2 questions from the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Will you commit to making any report Mueller produces at the conclusion of his investigation available to Congress and to the public?
As I said in my statement, I am going to make as much information available as I can, consistent with the rules and regulations that are part of the special counsel regulations.
Will you commit to making any report on the obstruction of justice public?
That's the same answer.
Thank
yes.
you. In your June 2018 memo about obstruction of justice to the Mueller investigation, you repeatedly referred to Mueller's, quote, sweeping and all-encompassing interpretation of Section 1512, which is a statute on obstruction. How do you know what Mueller's interpretation of 1512 is?
Well, as I said, I was speculating. I freely said at the beginning, I was writing in the dark, and we're all in the dark. Every lawyer, every talking head, everyone who thinks about or talks about it doesn't have the facts.
So I spent my Saturday reading that memorandum.
Yeah.
So are you saying this is all your speculation? It's a big memo.
Well, it was informed to the extent that I thought that was one of the theories being considered. And I don't know how seriously, whether it was being considered or how seriously it was being considered. But as a shorthand way in the memo of referring to what I was speculating might be the theory, I referred to it as Mueller's theory, rather than go in every time I mention it, say, well, this is speculative.
Do you know what Mueller's interpretation of 1512 is?
No, I don't know what Mueller's interpretation. Okay. But, and just one point, Senator, I think, you said in your opening statement, I said he was grossly irresponsible. I think I said if something happens, it would be grossly irresponsible. I was not calling Mueller grossly irresponsible.
I understand. Thank you. I appreciate that. Has anyone given you non-public information about Mueller's investigation? I
don't recall getting any confidential information about the investigation.
Your 2018 in it, you stated, and I quote, "The framers' plan contemplates that the president's law enforcement powers extend to all matters, including those in which he had a personal stake," end quote. Please explain what you base this conclusion on.
Yes. Here's the Department of Justice right here. And within the Department of Justice, enforcement decisions are being made. The president's over here. And I think of it as there are 2 categories of potential communications. One would be on a case that the president wants to communicate about that he has no personal interest in, no political interest in. Let's say the president's concerned about Chinese stealing trade secrets and say, I want you to go after this company that's being, that may be stealing trade secrets. That's perfectly appropriate for him to do, to communicate that. But whether it's bona fide or not, the Department of Justice's obligation and the Attorney General's obligation is not to take any action unless we, the Department of Justice and the Attorney General, reach their own independent conclusion that it is justified under the law, and regardless of the instruction. And that's my quote that everyone is saying I'm sicking the, it's okay for the president to direct things. All I said was, it's not per se improper for the president to call on the department for doing something, especially if he has no personal or political interest in it. The other category of cases, and let's pick an easy bad example, would be if a member of the president's family or a business associate or something was under investigation and he tries to intervene. He's the chief law enforcement officer, and you could say, well, he has the power, but that would be a breach of his obligation under the Constitution to faithfully execute the laws. So, in my opinion, if a president attempts to intervene in a matter that he has a stake in to protect himself, that should first be looked at as a breach of his constitutional duties. Whether it also violates a statute, depending on what statute comes into play and what all the facts are.
Including the clause of the Constitution.
Well, I think there's a dispute as to what the emoluments clause relates to. I have not personally researched the emoluments clause. I can't even tell you what it says at this point. Off the top of my head, I would have said, well, emoluments are essentially a stipend attached to some office, but I don't know if that's correct or not. But I'm sure, I think it's being litigated right now.
I don't know either, so I'm going to try and find out. We'll come back another day and maybe discuss it. Your memo stated a fatal flaw in Mueller's interpretation of 1512C2 is that while defining obstruction solely as acting corruptly, Mueller offers no definition of what corruptly means. My understanding is that there's nothing in the public record that sheds light on his definition of obstruction. Do you know what his definition is?
I don't know what his definition is. I read a book where people were asking whether someone was, I don't know if it was accurate, but whether the president was acting with corrupt intent. And what I say in my memo is actually people don't understand what the word corruptly means in that statute. It's an adverb, and it's not meant to mean with the state of mind. It's actually meant the way in which the influence or obstruction is committed. That's its adverbial function in the statute. And what it means is, using it in the 19th century sense, it meant to influence it in a way that changes something that's good and fit to something that's bad and unfit, namely the corruption of evidence or the corruption of a decision maker. That's what the word corruptly means, because once you dissociate it from that, it really means very hard to discern what it means. It means bad. What does bad mean?
Let me go on because my time is so limited. You argue that and I quote, the Constitution's plenary grant of those powers to the president also extends to the unitary character of the executive branch itself. Specifically, you argue, and this is a quote, while Mueller's immediate target is the president's exercise of his discretionary powers, his obstruction theory reaches all exercises of prosecutorial discretion by the president's subordinates, from the attorney general down to the most junior line prosecutor, end quote. So if the president orders the attorney general to halt a criminal investigation for personal reasons, would that be prohibited under your theory?
Prohibited by what?
By
the Constitution.
The Constitution.
I think it would be. A breach of the president's duties to faithfully execute the law. It would be an abuse of power. Whether it would violate a statute depends on all the facts and what statute someone would cite me to. But I certainly think it would be an abuse of his power. And let me just say that the position—
Would that be the same thing if an attorney general fired U.S. attorneys for political reasons?
No, because U.S. attorneys are political appointments.
According to news reports, President Trump interviewed you and asked you to be part of the legal team defending him in the Mueller investigation twice. First in the spring of 17, when the investigation was just beginning, and again earlier this year. Is that correct?
No. I had one conversation with him that related to his private representation, and I can describe that for you. That was in June of 2017. That's the only time I met him before I talked to him about the job of Attorney General, which obviously is not the same as representing him.
Have you discussed the Mueller investigation with the President or anyone else in the White House?
I discussed the Mueller investigation, but not in any particular substance. I can go through my conversations with you if you want.
Well, not at this time, but I may come back to you
Okay.
and ask you about that. I don't want to take any more time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.